Oh, all right, we are recording. So hello, my name is Stephanie Steer, and as Regina said, I am also a parent mentor here with Cincinnati Public Schools. So welcome to this month's session of Tool Talk. Each month we get together and discuss different hot topics in the field of special education. Some may apply to you some months, some may not. You might want to jump in and jump out, but check out our yearly schedule. We try to kind of meet the array of services and supports for all of our different students across the district. So for tonight's series, it is titled Sensory Integration: How Does It Impact My Child's Behavior and What Can I Do About It? And as Regina said, this is CPS's own finest. We're lucky enough to have tonight Kim Richards, who's an occupational therapist with the CPS Autism Support Team. So we are ready to go. She's got her slides up, and welcome, Kim. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, just a quick background on me. So I have worked, as Stephanie and Regina both said, I'm an occupational therapist. I've worked for Cincinnati Public Schools now. This is my 24th year. I've been the occupational therapist on the autism support team for the last 10 years. So I've done presentations like this. It is a lot of my information was autism based, but I went through this and kind of fixed it up because everybody has sensory differences, whether you have autism or not. It's just clearer in individuals who have autism. So that's me. I'll go ahead and get started here. Thanks for joining us tonight. So I'm curious what brings everyone here tonight. Are you a teacher? Are you a parent? Are you an administrator? And you can just type that in the chat. So I have a general idea of, who's here tonight and how I can best present for you. So while you're doing that, I'll just go ahead and on to the next slide. Did somebody raise their hand?
Yes. Ms. Higgins?
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to find a way to type into the chat. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. So what we're going to go through tonight, sensory integration, I'm sure that's a term you've heard a lot. It's used interchangeably with sensory processing, and I just kind of wanted to go through that real quickly and talk about the differences, talk about the sensory systems and what you can do. So sensory integration, this term was coined by Dr. Jean Ayers. She was an occupational therapist and an educational psychologist. And in the mid-1970s, she kind of recognized that children's sensory systems were impacting their ability to learn and their behaviors. And so she did some heavy research, and this is a coined term, the Ayers sensory integration. So something to know about this is that like I said, I've been with Cincinnati Public for 24 years. So back in the day when I was in school, there were these what there's called frames of references that we all learned about as occupational therapists. I looked it up the other day. They're up to like at least 25 different frames of references that occupational therapists use. And this is one of them. So, and as you all know, like being in school, they didn't go into great detail about sensory integration. So as an occupational therapist, that's something you would have to, on your own, kind of go for and find some continuing education in sensory integration. So sensory integration is it's just the way that our body reacts to senses coming from both outside our body and inside our body, and our response to the different senses that our body, our neurological system is perceiving. Sensory processing is kind of a newer term than sensory integration, but they are used interchangeably. So sometimes people say sensory processing, sensory integration. It's the same idea, but a little, where I said sensory integration, as an occupational therapist, you would have to be certified to use that. Sensory processing is a little bit different. So sensory processing disorder was a term first used by Dr. Lucy Miller. She studied under Jean Ayers, and she started using this term in a book called Sensational Kids. So if that's something that you're interested, I looked it up. It is available on Amazon. Just some more information about sensory processing and sensory processing disorder. And all of her work relies heavily on Dr. Jean Ayer's initial work with sensory integration theory. So what is a sensory processing disorder? Whoops. Again, it's a disorder, a neurological disorder of the brain. It affects children and adults alike. Children and adults with a sensory processing disorder, they misinterpret the sense, the sense of touch, sound, movement. Some might feel bombarded by these senses coming in. Others may not even be impacted by it. Like, you have to give them more input for it to register. So Dr. Miller, she wanted to get sensory processing disorder. Her goal was to get that in the DSM-5, which is kind of a little guidebook with different disability categories in it. But as of right now, it's still not in there. But a trained occupational therapist can identify this disorder. So the incidence of a sensory processing disorder, typically developing child, but in that population, about 5 to 16% may have a sensory processing disorder. If your child has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the odds of them having a sensory processing disorder as well increases to 46 to 60%. And then the severity or the increase of incidence is greater with individuals who have an autism spectrum disorder. So if your child or somebody that you know has an autism spectrum disorder, the chances that they'll have a sensory processing disorder as well are really high, 70 to 90%. So let me ask you a question, and I might have already given you the answer on my agenda there, but how many sensory systems do you think there are? And you can say it if it's easier to just take yourself off mic and say it, or type it in the chat. Anybody want to take a stab? Okay, 6, I see. All right. So sensory processing disorder, it's very deep, very involved, right? So you've got your umbrella, your sensory processing disorder, and under that sensory processing disorder, you've got a sensory modulation disorder, which is then broken down even further into sensory over-responsive, under-responsive, and craving. And then you have a sensory-based motor disorder, which breaks down into dyspraxia or a postural disorder. And then you have sensory discrimination disorder, which goes into the different senses. And so a sensory processing disorder can impact one of the senses up to all 8. And so, but for today, for purposes of today, we're really going to be focusing on this sensory modulation disorder. So I found this image and I liked it because it just gives you kind of little cartoon characters of what that might look like. A sensory discrimination disorder, they're not really able to interpret what's coming in. Sensory over-responsive, they might overreact to different sensory input. Under-responsive, that sensory craver, that kid that's always on the go and just can't quite get enough input. And then your postural disorder, the kids that act like they don't, or they present as they don't want to. And dyspraxic, I can't do that. So I talked a little bit, so the sensory modulation disorder is under that umbrella. So the over-responsive individuals, the senses coming in, it's too much, too soon, too long, and it's hard for them to tolerate it. Somebody that's under-responsive, it's like they're not quite picking up. They need more input for it to register. And then I talked a little bit about those sensory cravers, the kids that are just constantly touching, smelling, moving. They're just constantly trying to get that input, and to the point where it almost becomes disorganizing for them. So I'm not gonna, I just put this there for your reference, but we're not talking about this tonight. This is the sensory-based motor disorder, which as OTs, we do work on this as well, the dyspraxia and the postural disorder, but that's not what this presentation is about tonight. And then again, the sensory discrimination disorder, same thing. I put that there for your information. So I see somebody, the guess was 6 senses, and I'll tell you now, the reveal is that there are 8 different senses. So you've got your auditory, which is your sense of hearing, visual, sight, tactile is touch, vestibular is your kind of your sense of movement. That's the information that your inner ear is giving you. Proprioceptive is that deep pressure touch, and that's we get that internally from our body, from joints, ligaments, muscles. Gustatory is your sense of taste. Olfactory is your sense of smell. And then interoception is kind of that internal organ awareness, which is linked with emotions. And so we'll go through each one of those one by one. So the other thing, I started with kind of telling you about Dr. Ayers, because what's important to know is the difference between a sensory integration treatment and a sensory strategies. So an OT who is doing sensory integration treatment must be certified in Ayers sensory integration. So they need to go, it's years of extra schooling on top of their OT degree. And so most OTs are not certified for sensory integration. There are quite a few, but I think in our school district, we may have one OT who is certified in sensory integration treatment, because it's a very specific protocol. But we all of us OTs in Cincinnati Public use sensory strategies, and that's driven by sensory integration theories. But the sensory strategies are just kind of helping support our students, their arousal levels and their attention to task using different sensory tools. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there because I know it can get confusing and the terms are used interchangeably. So this is something I've used over the years, these little cartoon, little boy and girl, this kind of describes some of our kids. I hate having my hair brushed. I'm a picky eater. I complain about clothes in my tags in my clothes. I chew on everything. I'm always smelling. So just a little image there to kind of give you a better sense of what we're talking about tonight. This next video is Dr. Temple Grandin. If you don't know her, she's very a well-known person in the autism community. She is an autistic individual, and she has done she's done a lot for the autism community, but she also talks a lot about sensory differences. And like I said, I've been on the autism team for 10 years, and I feel like some of the best information I've gotten about sensory is from adults who have autism who can tell us about it, because they are, what I'm hearing from these adults with autism is that the way they are perceiving sensory input is so different than what you would expect. So one of the adults I've listened to in the past has talked about different colors can make her feel nauseous. So that's just not something you would expect, right? So I'm going to go ahead and play this video just to kind of introduce her and Dr. Temple's take on sensory.
People have got to recognize the sensory issues, that you have an autism, Asperger, ADHD, dyslexia, many different diagnoses. I have sound sensitivity. When the school bell went off, it hurt my ears like a dentist drill. Other people have visual sensitivity. They cannot tolerate the flicker of fluorescent lights. They're going to have to be gotten away from fluorescent lights unless we get the new electronic ones that work at a higher frequency. Touch sensitivity. I can't stand scratchy clothes against my skin. In fact, I find that certain types of T-shirts are rough fabric. I can't wear those T-shirts. These are very real things, and they can be very, very debilitating. And these sensory issues need to be researched. They are also something that's going to need to be accommodated.
Okay. So I think that's the biggest take home for me. You know, research, the OTs are doing that. OTs are actively researching sensory right now. But also I think the biggest take home for us tonight is the accommodations. Just recognizing these sensory differences and being able to make some accommodations to make our kids more comfortable. Let's see. Uh-oh.
People have not hurt.
Sorry, hold on. Okay, so as I said before, there's 8 sensory systems. Your common senses are the ones that most of us know about, you know, hearing, sight, taste, smell, touch. Those are all sensations that are coming from outside of our body. And then you have what are referred to as the uncommon senses. So if you've ever worked with an OT, you've heard these before: vestibular, proprioceptive, and interoception. And those are senses that are coming from inside our body. So auditory is your sense of hearing. And so a kid who may be over-responsive to auditory input may cover their ears to close out sounds. They might complain about noises that don't bother most people or that maybe you don't even hear. Under-responsive kids might ignore voices. They might have the TV or radio playing really loud. And they might be those kids that are just talking to themselves constantly or just making noise for noise's sake. So they're just seeking more input to get that sensation. So some interventions that we use in school, you know, if kids are having a hard time interpreting verbal directions, you can pair that with some visual supports to support the words that you're saying. You can also slow down your directions, give one direction at a time. Like I said, slow down, give some wait time when you're talking to make sure that they're processing what you're saying. And then noise canceling headphones are something that we use quite a bit in school. We see a lot of noise sensitivity with our kids. And then the talk phone is just that little thing. So if you got your kid that's talking a lot, making noise for noise sake, you give them this little talk phone and they can get that feedback and hear themselves talking. So it's a little bit more, the sounds coming directly to them instead of kind of going out. So your sight, visual, the sense of sight. Vision, you know, you've got your acuity, what your, you know, that 20/20 kind of vision. And then you have visual perception, which is how your brain is interpreting what you're seeing. And then visual motor integration, which is how your hands and body parts are working together to do things that your eyes and your brain wants them to do. So putting it all together. So for vision, a child who's over responsive may often cover their eyes. They might use poor eye contact. They might overreact to bright light. If they're under responsive, a lot of times with our kids with autism, we'll see what we call visual examinations. So they're really looking at things closely and intently for a long time. Or they may just miss the under responsive, they might miss visual cues like somebody's facial expressions or gestures because they're just not taking in that vision the way that we would expect. So again, this is another video. This is Dr. Stephen Shore. He is another adult, autistic adult. He's a professor at Adelphi University. And when I was putting this presentation, what was interesting about him is, you know, he's probably about my age, but when he says, you know, when he was younger, he was nonverbal. They were going to send him away and things, I'm not quite sure what his parents did for him, but now look at him. He's a professor. He's an autistic adult in in the autism community. So this is a video about him talking about sense of vision and how that impacts him.
I'm Stephen Shore, and I just have a brief message about sensory issues. One common sensory challenge that those of us on the autism spectrum face is dealing with downlights. Now, downlights are those lights that look like they're in a coffee can in the ceiling, and they shine down and really create a bit of a whiteout sensation, a painful sensation in the eyes. And that's one reason why you'll see many people on the autism spectrum wearing a baseball cap like this when they have to sit under fluorescent lights or under lights, under down lights.
Yeah, so just kind of going back to that, like the way, he's autistic and the way he's perceiving that light, he said it was painful. So just kind of keeping this in mind with our kids. Oh, I knew I was going to do this again. Hold on. So some visual interventions, again, using some visual support. So this is, I put classroom, but you can think about this in your home environment too as a parent. Like think about, is your, is it cluttered? Is your background, is it calming? Is it arousing? For writing as an OT, some of those visual perception, I put work on a slant board to bring the work closer to my students so they don't have to do that back and forth, kind of focusing in and out, near and far, using graph paper for math to help with that spacing. And, covering, like fluorescent lights tend to be problematic for some kids. So turning off the fluorescent lights and using natural lighting or table lamps instead. And also just never forcing a child to make eye contact because it could just be painful for them. I mean, I've heard people with autism say, if you want me to pay attention to you, don't ask me to look at you because I can't do both things at the same time. So your sense of taste, again, a lot of parents with kids with autism report that their kids are picky eaters. And that can be related to like the texture, the temperature, the smell of food, rather than the actual ability to swallow and chew. So it could be a sensory issue more than like the mechanics of chewing and swallowing. So kids who are over-responsive may gag when eating. They might prefer bland food. Kids who are under-responsive, I've seen them like stuff their food like little chipmunk cheeks. They're stuffing that in there because they're not getting that feedback. They may prefer spicy foods and may not recognize like noxious tastes like poisons. I don't see that a lot, but that's just an example of an under-responsive sensory system with taste. So some interventions, if it's sensory based, just kind of helping people understand the child's sensory differences. So if it's the texture of the food, the smell of the food that's causing the problem, just so other people are aware of that. You can modify the environment to make it a calming environment when they're eating. Again, I just keep going back to the visual supports to kind of prepare the child to anticipate different kinds of foods. I kind of talked about that ahead of time. Your sense of smell, those receptors are in the nose. So an over-responsive child may object to odors that other people don't notice. They may notice smells more than others do. Under-responsive might be those kids that are smelling everything and everyone. And then some interventions, just kind of think about the scent in your home or even the scent that you're wearing. So certain perfumes, colognes, lotions might be difficult for certain kids to be around, and just to kind of think about that as well. So your sense of touch is a big one that we see in the school. And going back to that sense of taste, your tongue is part of your sense of touch. And some over-responsive kids would avoid being touched by others. They may not like messy play. They may have that fight or flight response to getting touched or to different textures. Under-responsive, they might seek out the messy play, or they might be those kids that are exhibiting self-injurious behaviors where they're hitting themselves or biting themselves, or they're those kids that are just touching everything and everyone. So some tactile interventions, if you know you're going out and your child doesn't like to be touched, you can put them like in their favorite sweater or jacket to kind of so that there's less skin area to be touched accidentally. You can use carpet squares to designate a personal space that's in the classroom. And then weighted blankets help because the thing with tactile sensitivity is sometimes the kids can't interpret where that touch is coming from. And so the heavy weight blankets kind of gives their body that precursor, helps the body organize itself so they have a better sense of touch ahead of time. So if you are going to use things like weighted blankets, which I know are really common out there, you can pretty much go anywhere and buy a weighted blanket now. Just keep in mind it should never be more than 10% of a person's body weight. And then for children, they even say 5% is effective. So just keep that in mind. And if you're using things like weighted vests, the child shouldn't be wearing those for more than 20 minutes because after a while their body just gets used to that and it's not really having the impact that you want it to after a while. Vestibular is that sense of movement. The receptors are in the middle ear. This tells us where our body is in space. Some over-responsive kids might avoid moving. They're kind of earthbound. They may be those kids who are seasick in cars or elevators, and they're not a risk taker. They like sedentary tasks. And then you've got your under-responsive kids who are kind of those daredevils. They're constantly fidgeting. They're constantly moving. They like to be upside down. They're seeking that extra input. So some interventions you can do is let them jump on a trampoline, rock in a chair, go through obstacle courses, use different types of things for sitting, like an exercise ball or a seat cushion, and that will give some of that input for your kids who are seeking that out. Proprioceptive, again, is that internal sense of sensation that we're given that feedback from our muscles and our joints and our ligaments. And it's just that deep internal pressure, again, is telling us kind of where our body is in space. So over-responsive kids in the area of proprioception, they might avoid playground activities. They might be fearful of heights. Kids who are under-responsive may bump into objects. They might run their hands along the wall when they're walking. When they hug you, they might hug you too hard. So they're just kind of not getting that feedback for that deep pressure. So some interventions that you can try are some heavy work, the weighted blankets again. Yoga just gives your body kind of a real good feeling of where you are in space. It kind of gives that deep pressure input internally. And then some like high resistance, like stationary bikes, tricycles, scooter board, dancing, things that just kind of give you that internal awareness with your muscles and joints and ligaments. So the last few sentences I talked about, I took some of those from, not all, but there's Carol Kranowitz wrote a book, and it's very dated now. It's 1998, but it's called The Out of Sync Child, and it's a really good book. I've seen it in libraries. It just tells you in very simple terms about the different senses and what you can do with your child. So interoception is the 8th sensory system. So this is something that, like I've said, I've been with Cincinnati Public for 24 years, with the autism team for 10, and I would say it's probably maybe the last 6 years that I've heard people talking about interoception. There's a lot of training. If you Google Kelly Maller, she's the OT who was talking about interoception, and she's written some resources on it. And this is just, how is your body feeling inside? So what kind of messages are your organs sending you? For example, if your bladder is full, you need to use the restroom. Some kids aren't getting those sensations the way that you would think or you would expect. So that's a picture of Kelly Maller in the top left. Chloe Rothschild is a young adult with autism, and she and Kelly present together. And Chloe and Kelly have written a workbook for interoception. And the thing that's, again, like I said earlier, just going back to adults who have autism, listening to them and the way they experience things. Chloe can talk. She is verbal. She uses complete sentences. But if she is feeling overwhelmed by sensory input, she becomes nonverbal. And so she has a Dynavox, which she carries around with her that helps her speak when she's feeling anxious or nervous or overwhelmed. So it's always interesting hearing these two present. But just so you're a little bit, this little video is about interoception, because there's also a lot of talk about how your internal organs are linked to emotions as well. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video. Okay. So that video focused heavily on autism, but I would venture to say that some of our kids with sensory processing, regardless if they have autism, this could be an area that they may struggle with as well. Gotta figure out how to stop doing that. So some interventions that you can do with your child is, the biggest thing is talk about your own interoceptive awareness, how you're feeling like, oh, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. My heart is racing. My hands are sweating. I am feeling kind of anxious. So just kind of talking about how you're feeling so that gives meaning to that for them. So remember, this sensory differences can and do fluctuate. Something that works one day may not work the next. Illness, fatigue, stress, they all impact our response to sensory input. So this morning I was having trouble with my Google document. It wasn't working. I was trying to get ready for a meeting, and things that normally didn't bother me were really bothering me. People talking. Also, if I'm driving, if I'm getting lost, the first thing I'm going to do is turn down the radio. So it's like things that normally don't bother me, if I'm under stress, might bother me. And it's the same thing for our kids. So just kind of think about, because I know we're running short on time, I'm not going to stop here, but think about what are your sensory differences and what do you do to accommodate for them? Because we all have sensory differences. So now let's put it all together. So I've got 3 different pyramids here, and each pyramid, I'm going to just go through them real quickly, but you can see like they're all based on our sensory system needs to be intact and functioning before we can do those higher level activities. This is one pyramid of learning. This is another pyramid. It's kind of upside down, but this is from Dr. Miller, who coined sensory processing disorder. And again, she has all of those senses on the bottom that to support these higher level functioning. Being able to learn, being able to pay attention, being able to behave are all kind of dependent on your senses, your sensation. Ruth Aspie and Barry Grossman are big in the autism community. Their interventions, again, it's all based on sensory and biological. We need to have all of this intact before we can expect all of these higher level things to happen. And when I say intact, it's more, the accommodations that we talked about, just kind of using different tools to help modulate regulation and attention. So, there's 14 different disability categories. And so when we're looking at kids, do they have a disability category? Yes or no? If yes, how does that impact their educational performance? So there's all these different educational performance that we expect of our kids. And so the question I'm asking you is, if your child has one of these disabilities, and we know that it's having a negative impact here on their educational performance, do you think sensory differences might have an impact on how they're performing? So it's not everything, but it's part of it. And like those pyramids I just showed you, it's kind of like, as educators, as parents, we need to kind of keep in mind we're accommodating for these sensory differences to help our kids pay attention and learn. So what can you do? You can understand the reason behind the behavior, which I hope I accomplished with our presentation tonight. You can think globally, think large group, think individually, and I'll go into that a little bit more by what I mean. So the next few slides that I'm going to show, they were created for a school-based presentation, and they're school-based recommendations. But if you look at them, you can easily modify these to use at home. So structuring your classroom is something that I talk to our teachers about. Think about the physical environment, and you can think about this at home too. Like minimize the visual clutter, think about the lightings, think about the smells. Just want to make it a calming environment for our kids. Some common tools that we use in a school setting: a body sock, the noise canceling headphones that I mentioned earlier, the weighted blankets, the pressure vests, the disco seats. That's something we put in a chair to kind of help those kids that are craving movement. The home-based strategy for your kids who are feeling overwhelmed is just a place that you create for them to be able to get away from the sensory input that might be dysregulating them. It's a safe place for them to take a break, to recover. It's not a punishment. It's not a timeout. And it's not a place to avoid completing work, but it's a place to just kind of go to and self-regulate. And so in the home base, like I talked about Chloe, who loses her ability to talk fluidly verbally, you can put some visual supports in there about when I'm in this home base, what am I gonna do? You know, I'm gonna take 3 slow breaths. I'm gonna say I need a break. And, you know, it just kind of gives this organization strategy of what you're gonna do when you're in that space. Think large group, think all students. So recommend to teachers to kind of schedule some whole group activity for kids, you know, some movement activity prior to times that you're expecting them to sit down and pay attention. So at home, that could look like, you know, if it's time to do homework, you're going to give your kids some time to go play, to move around, to get themselves organized before you're asking them to sit down, pay attention, and do their work. Some calming activities. So this is something that I recommend, like if you're having a kid who is having some problems with regulating themselves, who are having some of those explosive behaviors, to make calming part of their daily schedule. And so what that looks like is, like, I've created this calming story kind of talking about, you know, sometimes I get upset. I need to do things to calm my body. This is what I can do. So that kind of presents the idea of then using this is, you would cut this out and give your child 3 things that they're going to do that, you know, calm them. And they're going to practice this every day so that if they are at a point in the future where they're having a hard time, you can say, go do your calming activity. So they've already practiced it in a time that's not stressful, and now they can use this to help themselves calm down. So think individually. A sensory diet, if you've never heard of this before, this is something that OTs will put together for kids. And again, this is one of those sensory strategies using sensory tools for times that we know that kids might need some support. And this is just an example of what it might look like. It might be hard for you to see. I apologize for that. But this, you know, it has the time of day. It has what the child's expected to do, you know, if it's breakfast time, if it's instruction time. And then the third column is paired with kind of a sensory tool or strategy for that child. So the reason I say this is individualized is because it's individualized for that child. You wouldn't create this and have everybody do it. It would just be for that child, and you would work in tandem with an occupational therapist to create something like this. Okay, so this is, I don't know, Stephanie, this is the last video. I know we're kind of at the 45-minute point. Should I play this video? It's about, I don't know, 3 minutes, and then we can stop for questions, or am I good to keep going?
I'd say go ahead. You've got 3 minutes.
All right, okay.
I wish there was someone who knew how this felt. Why is the teacher looking at me like that? He's looking at me funny. What will they think if I run out? My ears hurt. Oh, what's that sound? Oh, I've got a headache. My heart's beating so fast. I feel really hot. This is too much. It can feel like this every day, but it's difficult to explain. Often when we are most vulnerable, we are least able to communicate. We wanted to tell teachers what we thought might be useful to know and how they can help.
Don't invade my personal space, especially when I'm stressed.
Don't force
force eye contact. It makes you feel threatened and gives you anxiety.
Allow me to use fidget toys like stress balls to help me calm down in lesson.
Allow time out, especially when I'm having a bad day.
Allow me to have time and space on my own.
Don't show favoritism that makes people feel bad about themselves. Take the time to get to know me in the way I work. Don't assume I'm okay having transitioned from one class to another. Don't be illogical. Start at question 1. Don't be ambiguous with time and timings and tasks.
Don't rearrange your classroom frequently. Give me some warning before you do so.
Don't force me to socialise. It doesn't help. Please listen, and please be kind, and treat everyone equally. Please try to find discreet strategies to communicate with me when I'm stressed out, so that you can give me time out.
And please, allow me to learn in my own way. Do be flexible. Thank you.
Try to incorporate my special interest in your lessons.
Forewarn us about change.
Learn breathing exercises to help you calm down.
Don't say calm down or similar phrases, as it does not help.
Check in and find out how I'm doing or feeling.
Don't compare students to how they were yesterday or in another lesson.
Please don't judge me or discriminate me. Please accept who I am.
Okay.
That was definitely worth the 3 minutes. You took some great videos tonight, Kim.
Oh, thanks. So, that's just the biggest thing I want you guys to take from this is just recognizing and realizing that everyone has their own sensory differences, but it's a sensory processing disorder if it becomes that the kids can't function or that adults can't function. I mean, I put that slide in earlier that we all have sensory differences, but most people find ways to manage it that are functional. Is the kids who cannot find ways to manage it and their behavior becomes dysfunctional. So it's just kind of helping with that. So I hope that from this presentation tonight, you get some strategies for that and even some terms you can use with your occupational therapist. And just giving a plug for our district, I've been here for 24 years and I will say we have a great group of occupational therapists. So don't hesitate to reach out to them because they're really well-informed, great staff. So
on that note, would you mind just filling us in on the autism support team, like what you guys do, when we might see you, where would you enter the room?
We wear a lot of hats. So I think Tyler might be on. I think I saw him join the call. He's our manager, Tyler Idwin.
I'm here.
Yep, there he is. There's 4 of us on the team. So I'm the occupational therapist. Sarah Irie is the speech language pathologist. Beth Seiler is our school psychologist. And Missy Griffith is our intervention specialist. So some of the things we do, school-based evaluations, we're all trained to do the ADAS, which is the autism assessment, the individual autism assessment, and we're all trained to do the parent interview, which is the ADIR. So some involvement you might see there, we do with parents, with the ADAS and with the ADIR. We coach teachers, both teachers who are autism teachers, teachers who are MD teachers, and even some intervention specialists that are out doing push-in with kids. We do professional development like this for our district. What else, Tyler? There's other things I know. We
coach gen ed teachers as well about interventions in the classroom to support inclusion as well.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we do. I love being part of the team. It's nice to be able to specialize, in a disability such as autism. I find it fascinating. So, even though this presentation, a lot of my material was autism based, I still just want to say that sensory processing disorder, you do not have to have autism to have a sensory processing disorder. It's, 2 different things, but people with autism are more likely to have a sensory processing disorder.
Thank you so much. We'll take a few minutes and we can open it up if there's any questions or comments. I would just like to say all the information on the interoception is just fascinating to me.
It really is. Yeah. It's really good information. And I mean, if you're interested, that workbook with Chloe and Kelly looks like it could be a really good one if you're looking for something like that with your own kids.
Thank you. It's a great resource.
So thank you guys all for joining tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kim. It was wonderful information. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, everyone. With the upcoming busy holiday season, we'll be skipping the month of January, but we'll be returning Thursday, February 1st from 6 to 7 p.m. here again on Google Meet. We'll be presenting our next session of our Tool Talk series, and that will be connecting with outside agencies, and we will have a rep here from the ARC to speak to family supports, building relationships, and various ways to increase supports in your child's independence at home. So we hope to see you here next month. Thank you for attending tonight. Again, I've captured all the emails that are in the chat box there, and we will send out a video link and presentation for those that requested. And we will add you to our email list for next month's flyer when we send out some reminders. But thank you for attending tonight. Thank you so much, Kim. This was great information.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you. You too. Good night.
So I guess, Stephanie, I'll just maybe email you a PDF of this presentation. Is that what you need?
That would be perfect. Yep.
Okay. All right. Was that what you were looking for tonight?
Beautiful. That was great. And the videos were a big help. We've actually not had videos shared the last couple, so that definitely added to the presentation.
Well, that's me.
Good
I'm
one.
such a visual, like, you can tell me and talk about it, but if I can have a video of it, then I'll understand it a little bit better.
Yeah. No, I thought that was great. You did a great job pulling together. Thank you. I know it's stressful. Especially covering for someone else, and especially last minute.
I kept telling my family, I'm like, okay, once I get this done, then I can focus on Christmas.
Oh, this is me every month. I'm like, if I can just get through Tool Talk, if I can just get through, I don't know why, you know.
I know. Oh, wow.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you so
Well, have
much.
a great night.
Appreciate it. Yes, we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.